Welcome to this module on the past subjunctive. Now we already know that we have a present subjunctive in Spanish, but we also have a different sound for the past subjunctive. For example, we have here, I want her to be here. So here we are in the present tense, and our trigger is here. So we have quiero que esté aquí. Here we have the present subjunctive with estar. This is things that we have already been through. Quiero que esté aquí. Now, what if instead of saying, I want her to be here, the sentence was, I wanted her to be here. Now we have the same trigger, but in the past. So this is going to trigger the past subjunctive of estar. Let's look at another example. It's important that you tell me the truth. So this is the present tense. Here we have our trigger. It's important that. So we get es importante que me digas la verdad. Here we have decir in the subjunctive. Now that same sentence could be, it was important that you told me the truth. Okay, so now we have switched into the past. It's the same trigger. But instead of saying it is important, we're now saying it was important. And this is where the past subjunctive will come into play with the verb decir. So here we have a key point. Whatever triggers the subjunctive in the present tense will also trigger it in the past. So we have a trigger here of I want that, triggering the subjunctive, but also I wanted that. Or I hope that in the present triggers the subjunctive. So too will I hoped that in the past. I need that, this is the present tense. But also I needed that. Again, it's the same trigger but in the past. And we can go on down the line. It's fantastic that. It was fantastic that. So we have all the same triggers that we're already used to. It's just that now they're in the past. This makes it easy to match. If you have a trigger in the present tense, you will use the present subjunctive. If, however, you have a trigger in the past tense, you will use the past subjunctive. So the good news, what this all means, is that we only need to learn how to form the past subjunctive, because all the other work has already been done. We already know the triggers. It's just that these same triggers will now be appearing in the past instead of in the present. So let's dive into it. Before we get into actually how to form the past subjunctive, I'd like to give you some examples of how it sounds. Let's look at this example sentence. I want him to know what happened. This is in the present tense because we have I want him. I want him to know what happened. I wonder if you can pause and try to figure out how you would say this. It would be quiero que sepa lo que pasó. We have our trigger quiero que, which triggers the sound of sepa, which is the present subjunctive of the verb saber. Quiero que sepa lo que pasó. Now, instead of having, I want him to know what happened, we could equally have, I wanted him to know what happened. So here we have the same trigger, but in the past. And this changes the sound dramatically. We have now, quería que supiera lo que pasó. This is the trigger now in the past, the same trigger, but I wanted that. Quería que triggers the past subjunctive of saber. So this is where we get this exotic sound of supiera coming in. Quería que supiera lo que pasó. I wanted him to know what happened. Let's try another. I want her to be here. So here we have the present tense. Again, try to do this on your own. Quiero que esté aquí. the present subjunctive of estar because we are in a present tense trigger, quiero que. But we could equally say, I wanted her to be here. So now we get quería que estuviera aquí. Another very exotic sound. This is the past subjunctive of the verb estar. And we are forced into this sound because we're now in a trigger in the past. I wanted her to be here. Quería que estuviera aquí. Let's look at this one. I hope he does it. How would you say that? Espero que lo haga. Our trigger in the present tense. Espero que. And we have the verb hacer in the present subjunctive. Haga. But instead of I hope he does it, we could say I hoped he did it. So now we have esperaba que lo hiciera. Here we have our trigger in the past. I hoped that. Esperaba que. Followed by the past subjunctive of hacer. And we get again an exotic sound. Lo hiciera. Another one could be I hope he arrives on time. This is the present tense. So try to say this one. Espero que llegue a tiempo. We could equally have I hoped he arrived on time. Now we are in the past. So the sound changes. We have esperaba que llegara a tiempo. This is the past subjunctive of the verb llegar. As you can see, we have exotic sounds everywhere. We have supiera, estuviera, hiciera, llegara. So the question becomes, where are those sounds coming from? How do you get to those sounds? Well, I would like to give you a two-step process. You could even call it a secret. Not everyone is aware of this. Let's take the verb hacer. What we want to do is find the sound for they did. And this would be in the simple past or the preterite. That sound would be hicieron. If we conjugate the simple past, you can see it here at the very end. Hicieron. Now, once we have that sound, it's very easy to get into the past subjunctive. Hicieron would go to hiciera. So if you like, that sound of they in the simple past acts as like a doorway into the sound for the past subjunctive. So again, let's start over. We have our verb hacer, and the question to ask is, what is the simple past for they? So they did. Now, once you arrive at the sound of hicieron, you can easily go into the past subjunctive hiciera. Let's run this process again, but this time with the verb saber. We begin by asking, what is the simple past for they knew? If we conjugate it on one slide, you can see it here at the end. Supe, supiste, supo, supimos, and then this is the sound we want, supieron. Once we have supieron, we can easily get into the past subjunctive for saber because supieron goes to supiera. Let's put both examples on one slide. We have hicieron, hiciera, supieron, supiera. Let's do it one more time with the verb estar. So what we want is they were in the simple past. Putting it all on one slide, you can again see the sound that we're looking for at the very end for they. This would be estuvieron. Now, once we have estuvieron, it's very easy to get to estuviera, which would be the sound of the past subjunctive with the verb estar. All the way down the line, you can see we have this iera sound. So, hicieron, hiciera, supieron, supiera, estuvieron, estuviera. This iera sound is what happens when you have hicieron, supieron, estuvieron. But we also have another sound for they in the simple past. For example, if we took a verb like llegar, we would again ask ourselves what would be the past, or the simple past, meaning they arrived. That would be llegaron. As you can see, this is a different sound from the others, and I'm going to give you this on one slide in a second, which should make it a lot clearer. But when you have an aron verb, so it could be llegaron, hablaron, tomaron, whatever it is, then the past subjunctive actually goes to an ara sound. So llegaron, llegara. Now let's take a look at both of those examples on the one slide. Here you can see the simple past for they with an ieron sound will go to iera in the past subjunctive. But if the they simple past is an aron, such as here llegaron, then the past subjunctive goes to llegara. So we have two main sounds here for the past subjunctive. It's either iera or ara. This is something that is not going to confuse you. The reason why is because you're always taking your sound from this starting point. So hicieron, hiciera, llegaron, llegara. You can see how one sound leads very naturally into the other. The key is always to find the simple past for they in whatever verb you happen to be working in. In other words, the sound for the simple past depends upon what the sound for they is. So whatever you have for they is going to lead you very naturally into the sound of the past subjunctive for that verb. I'll give you now some more examples. We could take, say, the sequence for the verb comer, to eat. So again, we're looking for the sound of the past subjunctive. The first thing we do is say, what is they in the simple past, which would be comieron. And once we have comieron, it's very easy to find comiera. Let's switch over now. So we have hablar, and they spoke, hablaron. Now with hablaron, you couldn't really go into hablariera. It doesn't really make much sense. It doesn't flow naturally. Instead, we know that hablaron is going to go to hablara. So again, you have those two main sounds, iera or ara, and this will always be obvious which one you should use because it flows very naturally from the sound of they in the simple past. Let's take two more examples. So we could have salir, they went out, salieron, and the past subjunctive, saliera, salieron, saliera. Whereas tomar, so now we want they took, tomaron, and that leads us into the past subjunctive sound, tomara. So tomaron, tomara. We'll run through some more examples and I'll hold your hand a little bit through this. So what would they spoke be in the simple past? Hablaron. Now, if we wanted to get the past subjunctive, hablaron would go to what? Hablara. Let's take caminar. So what is they walked in the simple past? Caminaron. Now, the past subjunctive, caminaron, would go to what? Caminara. Let's take comer. What is they ate in the simple past? Comieron. Now, for the past subjunctive, comieron would go to what? Comiera. The great news is that this sequence works for all verbs, regardless if they're regular verbs or irregular verbs. The ieron sound will always go to iera, and the aron sound will always go to ara. So next up, we'll put this formula to the test and practice getting to the sound of the past subjunctive with a variety of different verbs. In part 2, we're going to run a preparation drill. That means that we're going to practice getting to the sound of they in the simple past with a variety of different verbs. Because as we know, once you have that sound, it's relatively easy to get into the past subjunctive for any verb. So let's run our drill with 100 verbs, and I'll get you started here with the first example. say we had the verb ser. So the only thing you have to do is tell me what they in the simple past would be for this verb. The answer is fueron. Now we're going to repeat this for another 99 verbs. Estar would go to what? Estuvieron. Tener. Tuvieron. Hacer. Hicieron. Poder. Pudieron. Decir. Dijeron. Ir. Fueron. Ver. Vieron. Dar. Dieron. Saber. Supieron. Querer. Quisieron. Llegar. Llegaron. Pasar. Pasaron. Poner. Pusieron. Quedar. Quedaron. Creer. Creyeron. Hablar. Hablaron. Llevar. Llevaron. Dejar. Dejaron. Encontrar. Encontraron. Llamar. Llamaron. Venir. Vinieron. Pensar. Pensaron. Salir. Salieron. Volver. Volvieron. Tomar. Tomaron. Conocer. Conocieron. Vivir. Vivieron. Tratar. Trataron. Mirar. Miraron. Contar. Contaron. Empezar. Empezaron. Esperar. Esperaron. Buscar. Buscaron. Existir. Existieron. Entrar. Entraron. Trabajar. Trabajaron. Escribir. Escribieron. Perder. Perdieron. Entender. Entendieron. Pedir. Pidieron. Recibir. Recibieron. Recordar. Recordaron. Permitir. Permitieron. Aparecer. Aparecieron. Comenzar. Comenzaron. Sacar. Sacaron. Necesitar. Necesitaron. Resultar. Resultaron. Leer. leyeron, cayer, cayeron, cambiar, cambiaron, presentar, presentaron, crear, crearon, abrir, abrieron, considerar, consideraron, oír, oyeron, acabar, acabaron, ganar, ganaron, formar, formaron, traer, trajeron, partir, partieron, aceptar, aceptaron, realizar, realizaron, comprender, comprendieron, lograr, lograron, explicar, explicaron, preguntar, preguntaron, tocar, tocaron, reconocer, reconocieron, estudiar, estudiaron, alcanzar, alcanzaron, nacer, nacieron, correr, corrieron, utilizar, utilizaron, pagar, pagaron, ayudar, ayudaron, gustar, gustaron, jugar, jugaron, escuchar, escucharon, cumplir, cumplieron, ofrecer, ofrecieron, descubrir, descubrieron, levantar, levantaron, intentar, intentaron, usar, usaron, decidir, decidieron, subir, subieron. Next up, we're going to practice getting into the sound of the past subjunctive for real. So I'll give you the full verb on the slide, and then mentally you're going to go to the sound of they in the simple past and make the connection into the past subjunctive. And we'll do this for about 100 verbs. So as an example, we could take the verb ser, and you're going to have to jump into the sound of the past subjunctive. So we know that ser goes to fueron for they, which would lead us into the sound of fuera. So let's repeat this again, but this time with the verb of estar. Estuviera, tener, tuviera, hacer, hiciera, poder, pudiera, decir, dijera, ir, fuera, ver, viera, dar, diera, saber, supiera, querer, quisiera, llegar, llegara, pasar, pasara, poner, pusiera, quedar, quedara, creer, creyera, hablar, hablara, llevar, llevara, dejar, dejara, encontrar, encontrara, llamar, llamara, venir, viniera, pensar, pensara, salir, saliera, volver, volviera, tomar, tomara, conocer, conociera, vivir, viviera, sentir, sintiera, tratar, tratara, mirar, mirara, contar, contara, empezar, empezara, esperar, esperara, buscar, buscara, existir, existiera, entrar, entrara, trabajar, trabajara, escribir, escribiera, perder, perdiera, entender, entendiera, pedir, pidiera, recibir, recibiera, recordar, recordara, permitir, permitiera, aparecer, apareciera, comenzar, comenzara, sacar, sacara, necesitar, necesitara, resultar, resultara, leer, leyera, caer, cayera, cambiar, cambiara, presentar, presentara, crear, creara, abrir, abriera, considerar, considerara, oír, oyera, acabar, acabara, ganar, ganara, formar, formara, traer, trajera, partir, partiera, aceptar, aceptara, realizar, realizara, comprender, comprendiera, lograr, lograra, explicar, explicara, preguntar, preguntara, tocar, tocara, reconocer, reconociera, estudiar, estudiara, alcanzar, alcanzara, nacer, naciera, correr, corriera, utilizar, utilizara, pagar, pagara, ayudar, ayudara, gustar, gustara, jugar, jugara, escuchar, escuchara, cumplir, cumpliera, ofrecer, ofreciera, descubrir, descubriera, levantar, levantara, intentar, intentara, usar, usara, decidir, decidiera, subir, subiera. Welcome to part 4. Towards the middle or the end of the drill, many of you probably found that you were able to skip that intermediate step and simply go directly into the sound of the past subjunctive. For example, hablar, hablara, comenzar, comenzara, utilizar, utilizara. Literally, we're just adding an A onto the end of the infinitive of the verb. Even with verbs that weren't AR, subir, subiera, entender, entendiera, comer, comiera. Now this all works very well, but you need to be careful with the irregular verbs. Because if we took another AR verb such as estar and we went into estara, that does not exist in Spanish. Because estar belongs to that group of irregular verbs, the only way to get to the sound of the past subjunctive is through they. So we had estar, estuvieron, leading us into estuviera. Another example would be with dar. If you went straight into dara, then again you would be wrong, you would not be understood. This is another one where we go from dar into dieron, and that gives us the correct sound of diera for the past subjunctive. Another verb could be sentir. If you went to sentiera, you would not be understood. This is because sentir goes to sintieron. This E changes to an I. This is the way that it is irregular. But from there, we get the correct sound from sintieron into sintiera. So while you can, with a great many verbs, simply use this system, hablar, hablara, comenzar, comenzara, utilizar, utilizara, or again, subir, subiera, entender, entendiera, comer, comiera, it does not work for irregular verbs. With the irregular verbs, or at least until you get used to them, the only surefire way to get to the correct sound for the past subjunctive is to go through the gateway of they. So I just want you to be aware of that. Alright, so let's continue with part 5. For a brief moment, I'd like to return to the present subjunctive and use hable as an example. So hable is the present subjunctive of hablar, standing for I speak. But not only does it represent the angle of I, but also he, she, or it speaks. So with hable, we have represented 4 different angles in the present subjunctive. I, he, she, and it speaks. Now, the same is true for the past subjunctive. If we take the sound of hablara, which is the past subjunctive of hablar, this sound hablara will also cover us for all 4 angles. I, he, she, and it spoke in the past subjunctive. So what we're left with is how to find the other angles, because we're missing you, we, and they. So let's focus first on you. It's actually very easy. All we do is add an S. So we take hablara, which is our key sound. Adding an S, we get hablaras. And this would be you spoke in the past subjunctive. So just hablara on its own, let's go back here, covers us for these 4. And if we were to add an S for that, hablaras, now we get the angle of you. But notice that we managed to keep that same key sound, just added an S onto it. And this is going to work in exactly the same way for all verbs. You simply take that key sound of the past subjunctive, add an S, and you will get the angle of you. Let's take another example. What's the past subjunctive of comer? Comiera. So comiera stands for I, he, she, and it ate in the past subjunctive. If we wanted to get you ate, we would simply add an S onto that, and we would get the sound of comieras. Try this next one on your own. Let's take llegara. So this is the past subjunctive of llegar, meaning I arrived, he arrived, she arrived, it arrived. So how would you get you arrived? Llegaras. Hiciera is I, he, she, or it did in the past subjunctive. What would be you did? Hicieras. So as you can see, in every case, to get the angle of you in the past subjunctive, you will just take that key sound and add an S onto the end of it. For the angle of they, again, it's very simple. You simply take that same key sound, but this time you add an N. So if we take hablara, representing I, he, she, or it, adding an N onto this key sound gives us hablaran, and this would stand for they spoke in the past subjunctive. This again will work with every verb. Let's take comiera. So here we have the angle of I, he, she, or it ate. If we add an N to that key sound, comieran, now we have switched into the angle of they. And it doesn't matter which verb you take. Hiciera. This represents I, he, she, or it did in the past subjunctive. Adding an N onto that sound gives us hicieran, and now this switches us into the angle of they for the past subjunctive, hicieran. So let's review once more. Hiciera on its own represents I, you, he, she, and it. Adding an S to it, hicieras, gives us you. Adding an N, hicieran, gives us they. So once you have that key sound, it's very easy to get all of the other angles. The one angle that can be a bit tricky to get is that of we. We're going to again take the key sound, but add mos onto the end of it. So the problem is that sometimes this can make the words quite long. Let's take a look at hablar. So in the past subjunctive, this goes to hablara. Now onto that key sound, we'll add mos. So we get habláramos. This would be we spoke in the past subjunctive. Habláramos. Looking at comer, we go through the same process. The past subjunctive would be comiera. Onto that key sound, we add mos. And so we end up with comiéramos. We ate in the past subjunctive. Notice that for the correct pronunciation, accents are being added to the words. So we have habláramos, comiéramos. If we take hacer, so the past subjunctive is hiciera. Again, we take that key sound, add on mos, and we end up with hiciéramos. This would be we did in the past subjunctive. So we're having, again, those two key sounds, either hiéramos or háramos. Now, where it can get a little bit tricky, a little bit difficult, is with verbs that have, say, 3 syllables, such as to understand. In Spanish, this is entender, so we have 3 syllables, entender. Now, getting to they understand would be entendieron, and that gives us the gateway into entendiera. So let's put this here. Entendiera. Now onto that, we're going to add mos for we. So the pronunciation or the sound that we have to reach is entendiéramos. That's quite a mouthful. To go from entender into entendiéramos. This is why the angle of we can be trickier than the others, just because the words can end up being quite long. But as with most things in Spanish, it's simply a matter of getting used to it. So let's go back into our key sound, say entendiera. We'll stick with this verb and do it live on the screen. Okay, so here we have entendiera. Adding an S to this, entendieras would be you understood in the past subjunctive. Taking it and adding an N, entendieran would be they understood in the past subjunctive. Getting to we, again, we stick with that key sound, entendiera, but we add a mos, and this forces us to put in an accent here, like this. So we get entendiéramos. In each case, we're sticking with the key sound entendiera and just adding either an S, an N, or a mos to get all of the other angles. In the next video, we're going to drill using these other angles. Following on from the last lesson, we're going to practice going down the line. So we'll take a verb like ver and try to conjugate it through all the angles in the past subjunctive. So the first question is, what does ver go to in the past subjunctive? What's the key sound? Viera. Now, using viera, I'd like you to conjugate from I all the way down to they. The answer is viera, vieras, viera, viéramos, vieran. Let's take caminar. What does it go to in the past subjunctive? Caminara. Now conjugate down the line. caminara, caminaras, caminara, camináramos, caminaran. Let's try subir. What's its sound in the past subjunctive? Subiera. Conjugate down the line. Subiera, subieras, subiera, subiéramos, subieran. What about tomar? What does it go to? Tomara. Now conjugate it. Tomara, tomaras, tomara, tomáramos, tomaran. What about an irregular verb like dar? What does it go to in the past subjunctive? Diera. Now conjugate it. Diera, dieras, diera, diéramos, dieran. The verb ir is another irregular one. What does it go to? Fuera. Now conjugate it. Fuera, fueras, fuera, fuéramos, fueran. Let's keep going with these irregulars. We have estar. What does it go to in the past subjunctive? Estuviera. So, work your way down the line now. Estuviera, estuvieras, estuviera, estuviéramos, estuvieran. A regular verb would be pagar. What does it go to in the subjunctive? Pagara. So, conjugate it now. Pagara, pagaras, pagara, pagáramos, pagaran. Let's try a couple more. Decir. What does it go to in the past subjunctive? Dijera. So, conjugate it. Dijera, dijeras, dijera, dijéramos, dijeran. One more. Decidir. What is its sound in the past subjunctive? Decidiera. Now conjugate it down the line. Decidiera, decidieras, decidiera, decidiéramos, decidieran. Welcome to part 7. We've already done a lot of work on forming the past subjunctive. So now we want to switch into actually using it. This means we're going to work on it with sentences. To begin with, we'll use our standard triggers. I wanted, I needed, and I hoped. So the triggers in Spanish are quería que, necesitaba que, and esperaba que. Let's try this first one. I wanted my daughter to learn Spanish. Just as in the present subjunctive, we can rephrase this, meaning I wanted that my daughter learned Spanish. So here we have the trigger, I wanted that, quería que, which means that learned must be in the past subjunctive. How would you translate that? Quería que mi hija aprendiera español. I wanted my son to wait here. Quería que mi hijo esperara aquí. I needed my uncle to decide what he was going to do quickly. Necesitaba que mi tío decidiera lo que iba a ser rápido. I wanted them to live here with me. Quería que vivieran aquí conmigo. I didn't want them to live here with me. No quería que vivieran aquí conmigo. I wanted all my children to learn Spanish. Quería que todos mis niños aprendieran español. I needed my friends to wait. Necesitaba que mis amigos esperaran. I didn't want my friends to wait for me. No quería que mis amigos me esperaran. I hoped that I could do it. Esperaba que pudiera hacerlo. I hoped that we could buy it today. Esperaba que pudiéramos comprarlo hoy. Now let's move into some impersonal triggers. So these are things like fue bueno que, fue malo que, fue fantástico que, fue importante que. For example, it was good that you were here yesterday. How would you say that? Fue bueno que estuvieras aquí ayer. It was bad that you drank so much tequila last night. The word tequila is actually a masculine word. Fue malo que tomaras tanto tequila anoche. It was very important that we studied for the exam. Era muy importante que estudiáramos para el examen. It was incredible that we spoke with someone so famous at the party. Fue increíble que habláramos con alguien tan famoso en la fiesta. It was good that you wrote to us last week. Fue bueno que nos escribieras la semana pasada. It was important that they waited. Era importante que esperaran. It was fantastic that they were here with us for Christmas. Instead of for Christmas, try saying in Christmas. Fue fantástico que estuvieran aquí con nosotros en Navidad. It was incredible that he spoke Spanish so quickly. Era increíble que hablara español tan rápido. It was a shame he didn't visit us. Era una pena que no nos visitara. You could also say era una lástima. It was a shame you didn't visit us yesterday. Fue una pena que no nos visitaras ayer. It was best that you told them the truth. Era mejor que les dijeras la verdad. In part 8, we're going to continue with some more sentences. Something else that triggers the subjunctive is the word unless in Spanish. This is a menos que. Let's look at this example. I wasn't going to tell him unless it was absolutely necessary. So here we have the past because we're saying I wasn't going to tell him. Now we have our trigger for the subjunctive, which means that it was must be in the past subjunctive. Try to work it out now. How would you translate that into Spanish? No iba a decirle, a menos que fuera absolutamente necesario. You can see in brackets I have decírselo. This would actually sound slightly more natural. Even though we don't say the word it in Spanish in this sentence, I wasn't going to tell it to him. It's implied, and in Spanish they do tend to throw it in. So, no iba a decírselo. Tell it to him a menos que fuera absolutamente necesario. Let's try another one. I wasn't going to buy it unless it was on sale. No iba a comprarlo a menos que estuviera en venta. Did you remember to switch into estar and go to estuviera? When things are on sale, it tends to be a temporary thing. Está en venta. It's on sale. So this is why it went into estuviera en venta. I couldn't help her unless she first told me the truth. No podía ayudarle a menos que primero me dijera la verdad. If you said ayudarla, that would also be okay, also understood. Sometimes the use of le depends upon what region or what Spanish-speaking country you're in. Some use it more than others. There wasn't a way to know unless I asked her. No había manera de saber a menos que le preguntara. Here's another example of something that would sound slightly more natural in Spanish. No había manera de saberlo. Even though we don't, again, use the word it in the English sentence, they will often use it in Spanish. So we have no había manera de saberlo, a menos que le preguntara. The important thing is that to get this part right, this is what we're really concentrating on. Let's switch back into some more traditional triggers now. I was hoping that you were able to do it. Esperaba que pudieras hacerlo. I was hoping that you were able to speak with them. Esperaba que pudieras hablar con ellos. I hoped that they were able to do it. Esperaba que pudieran hacerlo. She wanted me to go to the store. Quería que fuera a la tienda. If you wanted to make this explicit, you would throw in yo right here. Quería que yo fuera a la tienda. I wanted them to go to the store. Quería que fueran a la tienda. They wanted us to go to the store for bread. Querían que fuéramos a la tienda por pan. Let's do one more. It was good that you went to the dentist yesterday. Fue bueno que fueras al dentista ayer. Welcome to part 9. In a previous module on the present subjunctive, we learned a very important rule. That rule went, we use the future, they use the subjunctive. To remind you of this, let's look at this sentence. I hope you'll be here soon. Here we are in the present tense, and we're using the future in English. I hope you will be here soon. Now, if you said, espero que estarás aquí pronto, so here we're conjugating the future with estar to exactly match what we would say in English. This sounds instantly wrong in Spanish. Equally, if you said, I hope you're going to be here soon, and you went into espero que vas a estar aquí pronto, again, this would sound completely wrong. Even though we're using the future in English, in Spanish, after a trigger, they will still continue to use the subjunctive. So the correct translation is espero que estés aquí pronto. This is why we have this rule that says we use the future, they use the subjunctive. Now, something very similar happens with the past subjunctive. Let's look at this example sentence. I hoped that my friend would call me. Here we have that trigger in the past. I hoped that. And we're using would, the conditional tense. So, at first glance, you might be tempted to translate this as esperaba que mi amiga me llamaría. Here we have would call me, me llamaría. However, this is wrong in Spanish. It should be esperaba que mi amiga me llamara. What's happening here is that we're using would in English, but Spanish is still sticking to the past subjunctive. So in the present tense, we'll have situations where in English we'll use the future, but Spanish will use the subjunctive. Equally then, in the past, we have situations in English where we will use would, the conditional tense, but Spanish will continue to use the subjunctive after this trigger. So what we're going to do now is practice this particular situation. We're going to have triggers in the past, such as I hoped that, followed by a verb that's going to use the conditional, meaning would or could. So, after a past trigger, you have to avoid the temptation to put these verbs into the conditional. Llamaría, llamarías, llamaríamos, and so forth. Instead, you have to continue to use the past subjunctive, even though in English you would use the word would. Let's give it a go. It'll become clearer with a bit more practice. How would you translate this? I hoped my parents would sell the house. Esperaba que mis padres vendieran la casa. I asked him for his number, so I could call him later. This could also be so that I could call him later. This is what is triggering the subjunctive. Le pedí su número para que pudiera llamarle más tarde. Here you can see we did not go into podría and copy exactly the English. This would be podría llamarle más tarde, but because we have a trigger in the past subjunctive, we went into pudiera, the past subjunctive of the verb to be able to, poder. So it doesn't matter if this is a could or a would. You will still go into the past subjunctive and ignore this literal translation in English. Let's try some more. She spoke with me earlier so that I'd understand the situation better. habló conmigo más temprano para que entendiera mejor la situación. So here again we have I'd understand, meaning I would understand. But Spanish does not do this. Instead, it goes into the past subjunctive, entendiera. We hoped they would arrive on time. Esperábamos que llegaran a tiempo. Let's try one more. I wanted him to tell me what happened so that I could be ready. Be careful with this one. Quería que me dijera lo que pasó para que pudiera estar listo or lista. Let's examine this one. So first of all, we have I wanted him to tell me. This is our first trigger. So we have quería que me dijera. This is decir in the past subjunctive. But then we have what happened so that I could be ready. Here we have a second trigger for the subjunctive. So we had to use the subjunctive twice in this sentence. This is why it went into para que pudiera estar listo or lista. This is why I told you to be careful, because we had two triggers for the subjunctive, indeed the past subjunctive, in one sentence.